Hello, welcome to Gardener's World, and to a long meadow that at last is bathed in sunshine. It's coming and going, but while it's here, it's fabulous. And it does mean that the flowers are beginning to open. And when there is sun in spring, the copse is my favorite place because the flowers that are suited to this kind of managed woodland are that wonderful combination of vibrancy and delicacy. So you have the anemones creating this sea of spangled white flowers, and then the dog's tooth violets, much more dramatic with their back-turned turban-like petals, which then close at night. And both these flowers are set in this growing intensity of green, and it's just lovely. On tonight's programme, Arit Anderson explores an incredible vertical forest in Milan.
Welcome to our gardening future, the Bosco Verticale.
Nick helps an overwhelmed viewer tackle some unruly shrubs.
So you're up for a radical hack?
Yes, go for it.
Okay.
Good.
And I'll be planting up an alpine trough as a thyme lawn and sowing peas. When I cleared these grasses, I said you really shouldn't plant or divide any grasses until the soil warms up and you start to see signs of growth. Well, that's happening by degrees. Not all grasses grow at the same rate, but one of the first to grow, always, is Calamagrostis. And I've got a few examples here of Calamagrostis Karl Forster. These are very, very upright, straight grasses with panicles of flower. Really good vertical statements in a border. But you can see on this one, you've got the classic spreading out from an empty centre there in the middle. That means it's losing its initial vigour. Time to lift it, divide it, and then the basic clump will grow better for it, and we'll have a new one that I can plant elsewhere. And using those vertical stems as accents in a border is really effective. So if you're planting and planning your borders now, think of contrasting the uprightness of this grass with soft, billowy shapes of plants around it. But as for doing the job, you'll just cut in, dig a good clump out. Calamagrostis is pretty adaptable. It grows best in full sun, but it will grow in most soils and is pretty trouble-free. Plant that now, and that will get established and grow strongly. And that's really heavy. I'm pretending that it's not heavy, but believe you me, it is. If I chop down in there, and here, I've got 4 plants there that I can spread around the borders. And this will stay and grow strongly and give me the effect I wanted in the original position. Now, if I take a couple, so I'm thinking something like that, and maybe another one nearer the front there. And let's just get this chap in the ground. Planting them is very straightforward. Just make a hole and plant them as near as possible to the same depth. So we're at the right level. Pull the soil back round it. And the whole point about moving plants at this time of year is they hardly know it's happened. Those roots will be down and growing within days. And this now will grow up tall. We've got the peony behind it. This is a tree peony. And so you've got a little composition in the front of the border with the grasses dominating, but allowing room for other things to work around it. Okay, let's get the rest in. Last summer, I divided up a couple of big clumps of Iris sibirica. And these have got these grass-like leaves topped with beautiful, intense blue small flowers in June. The problem is the flowers last about 2 weeks, And then it's just foliage, which I think would look really good, weaving in amongst the grasses. Now, the great virtue of grasses is that they are adaptable for almost any space. You can have towering miscanthus, you can have little steepers, you can have very upright calamagrostis, you can have sprawling pheasant grass. You can find a grass for any garden. And we've been celebrating small gardens this year by running a competition called Every Space Counts, and asked you to send in pictures of your gardens as long as they were no bigger than 6 meters by 6. Now, we had hundreds of responses, from which our judges have whittled down a short list of just 5. Last week, we showed the first of those 5, and now here is the second.
We're Chris and Rachel. We live in the middle of Bristol.
And we've lived in this house for about 4 years. This garden is less than a year old. We created it last February, and we pretty much finished planting in May. So this is the garden's first spring.
When we moved in, all we had was a really narrow, skinny and pretty much sunless area at the back. So we knew in remodelling the house that we wanted to create a better aspect and orientation for the garden.
Our biggest challenge really has been we don't have any rear access, so everything has to come in through the front door. We had 4 tons of topsoil delivered. We also had about 3 tons of hardcore for underneath the bricks.
It's been a logistical challenge, that's for sure.
Our starting point really was the fact that we had all of these bricks from the house that we wanted to use in an interesting way. So taking inspiration from things like Italian courtyard gardens, where they have really beautiful paving and then lots of planting.
One of the key things about the design was to get different series of levels within the garden in only a small space. I think that really works well. There are 2 very distinct areas within the garden. There's the area nearest to the back of the house, which hardly sees any direct sunlight, where we've got ferns and hostas and shade-loving plants. And then moving towards the back of the garden, it becomes a real kind of hotbed during the summer months, and we've gone for something a bit more tropical. So dealing with those 2 areas has been quite a challenge.
At the moment in the garden, the ferns are really amazing because they just begun to unfurl a couple of weeks ago, so they're still fresh and lovely.
Yeah.
And then in the summer, the kind of real primary things are the bananas and the cannas and the dahlias, and they give a good deal of height and jungliness and colour, which is quite exciting. And this euphorbia's been amazing as well. That's sort of at least doubled in size over the last year. One of the crucial things for us is the connection between the house and the garden. It's really important that we bring the garden in. So we've got lots of glass, and when we're sitting at our dining table, it really feels as though the garden's just there. One of the nice things we found about having a small garden, particularly with lots of containers, is that we can give some plants very specific conditions. So we can have the Protea and the Banksia, all with their very particular soil conditions that we can supply them in that container.
In the corner of the garden, we've just made a little shed, which has at the top of it a nice glass roof and some shelves in for Rachel to grow her seedlings in.
I think it was supposed to free up the windowsills, but it hasn't worked. It's just meant I can grow more. The garden's really special to us because it's our first garden. It's something we've created together. It does feel amazing.
Yeah, and I think we feel really lucky, even though it's a small space, to have a little patch of our own in the city.
We'll be showing the other 3 gardens over the course of the next 3 weeks, and then you'll get a chance to vote which one you think should take the prize, and we'll announce that result at Gardeners World Live in June. Now, the rhubarb has had quite a tricky winter, like all of us. You know, it started to grow, and then it got cold and it hunkered down, and then it did another growth spurt, and then got hit by snow and beasts from the east and all sorts of things. But it's a tough plant. It'll take any amount of cold weather, and it does like rich soil, plenty of moisture, and the important thing is to harvest it now, but stop harvesting round about the beginning to middle of July to give it a chance to recover for next year's harvest. The key thing is to pull, not cut. If you cut, you leave an open wound, and you can get infection and disease in that. Stewed rhubarb and yoghurt for breakfast is one of the joys of spring, and rhubarb is the best of the season at the moment. That will be delicious. Come on, Nigel. probably not for you. Come on, Nigel. This trough had crocus in, and they were great. But of course, they'll do nothing else the rest of the year, so it's a complete waste to leave them in. I've taken them out. I've actually put them in a plastic pot to let them slowly die down, and then when they've died down, they can just be put to one side and replanted, probably out on the cricket pitch in September. Now, obviously, a trough like this limits what you can grow. We've got a very shallow root run, and it calls out for alpine plants of some kind. Now, you have to create the conditions that alpines will thrive in. And basically, that means, above all else, good drainage. If you've got a deeper trough, you need to put a drainage layer in the bottom, old crocks, stones, or even a layer of grit, and then cover it with either a sack or an old tea towel will do, and that means the soil won't get washed down into the drainage layer and clog it up. I don't need to do that in this because it's too shallow. But there is a hole here, and I'm going to cover that with a crock. This compost mix is half peat-free compost and half grit. It will seem potentially poor in nourishment, but that's what you want. Now, I've decided to make a little thyme lawn in here, using different types of creeping thyme. I've got 4 different types of thyme. This is a thyme called Highland Cream, little pinky white flowers, absolutely perfect for growing in a little pan or a trough. I'm going to plant this quite close to the edge, and that has got room to grow out over the edge like that, if need be. So I'll plant another one of the same variety about here. And the spacing is about 6 inches apart. And these will grow and form a continuous mat. I think I have another white flower in there. This is called snowdrift. Very fine, delicate flowers. This is creeping red, little pinky red flowers, which again will grow horizontally and down over the edge. I'll have another one of those. Thyme does need full sun. And the fact it's quite windy today that it's slightly exposed doesn't matter. These are alpine plants. They're used to cold, they're used to exposure, but they are absolutely not used to shade. All this is perfectly edible. You can use it like normal Mediterranean thyme, but essentially it's decorative. And this, you can see the stems have got a touch of pink in them, and this is called Cabourn Wine and Roses. But essentially what we want is a carpet of these aromatic leaves, never growing very tall, slightly creeping and hanging over the edge of the stone trough. So I can brush my hands over it, and you get that fragrance. And of course, with their different flowers coming at slightly different times, the bees will absolutely love them. Although alpines look so delicate, in fact, they're amongst the toughest of all plants. But what I do need to do is to dress this with clean grit. And the reason for that is that when it rains, the compost in here will splash up and get mud and dirt on these delicate leaves and flowers. And everything about this is about detail, about looking in. So it's worth paying attention to that detail and making sure it isn't spoilt. Now that looks fairly sparse at the moment, just these little cushions of thyme leaves. But very quickly, these will start to grow and they will completely cover that trough by midsummer. Now, if you don't have a trough, there are alpine pans which are shallow because they don't need a big root run, but with a big surface area, so these small plants can spread and you can enjoy them. And if you can't find an alpine pan, we often grow them in just simple little terracotta pots. Nothing special in itself, but can look lovely with an individual plant. And I came across these the other day. This is a little alpine primrose called Snow Cushion. Everything that we love about primroses reduced down to a doll's house size. And if we take this primrose, that can go in the middle. Now, there's a tiny little pincushion, Raulia, I never quite know how to pronounce that, australis, but that has got the same silvery white colours, and we can cram these in. This, which looks like a tiny little fern, this is Leptinella Platts Black, and we can pop that in, and then with some grit around them, that's just one colour tone. It's very simple, and obviously you will decide what you like, whether you want bright colours, whether you want single tones, whether you want to mix and match. And if you've got a tiny space, they are perfect plants. It's interesting that instinctively, if you've got a very small space, be it the whole of your garden or part of the garden, you look inwards and you scale everything down. But it doesn't actually have to be like that. In Milan, they've taken a very different, a much more dramatic approach to introducing vegetation into this very busy city. And Arit went along to have a look.
Milan, one of the great design capitals of Europe. Like all cities across the world, it's exciting, busy and vibrant. But it comes at a cost. 10 years ago, Milan was listed as the most polluted city in Europe. We all know that green spaces are part of the solution for cleaner air. But with a lack of precious space here on the ground, trees are often having to make way for businesses and homes. One forward-thinking architect and a landscape designer have come up with a radical solution and are spearheading a worldwide movement. It all started up there in the Italian sky. Welcome to our gardening future, the Bosco Verticale. These two extraordinary towers opened in 2014. Bosco Verticale means vertical forest. Up there are 700 trees, 5,000 shrubs and 15,000 climbers and perennials, all growing and thriving up to 27 stories high. That's 110 metres. These towers are phenomenal. The scale of them, I think, is something that I probably underestimated. I've come to meet internationally acclaimed architect Stefano Boeri to find out why he created this mini ecosystem in the sky.
Honestly, I've always been obsessed by trees. My dream was to imagine a building on architecture where trees were present not simply as a decoration, but like living subjects.
How do the buildings cope with the weight of those trees up at a height like that?
No, it's not so complicated. You are, in a certain way, preparing the structure to have these heavy perimeters. And then we work to define the best composition of the soil, because the soil should not be too heavy, for sure, but at the same time not too light, otherwise the roots of the trees could move too much. Now we have, I think, something like 18 different species of birds that are living and nesting in the vertical forest. Then also, that's an amazing confirm of how biodiversity could be implemented also in a very polluted and dense urban environment.
Laura Gatti is a landscape consultant. She worked closely with Stefano to create this incredible sky forest. Oh, wow. Every single tree has been carefully selected.
We chosen 20 species of different trees, also from the native around here or across Italy. For instance, we have a kind of ash, Fraxinus ornus, that is extremely adapted to the heat in the city. We have crab apples of different varieties, yes, and Lagerstroemia for the flower in summer also. What we are trying to do with not only with the trees but with the underlayer is found flowers and plants that you are used to see when you go outside for a walk in the country.
That's why I feel so grounded being so high up, because it's that sense of being in a woodland, I think, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Trees and shrubs grow in planters that have been integrated into the walls of the balconies to ensure stability. So how did Laura develop her high-altitude horticulture?
What we did basically is just to think like a tree, to be like a tree, and try to do what the tree needs in this situation. Choosing the right one, adapted to be grown in container.
What soil has to be in these containers for the majority of the trees?
But since we have 1 meter of soil, and we have to take into account also that roots needs oxygen, basically. Yeah. So we have to design a substrate in which the air and the oxygen could enter. We put into the planters a small stone, pumice actually,
so light.
But it's very, very light because to be happy, also the engineers, we have to be, we have to ensure that this system is not so heavy.
They chose trees which have a deep root system so they could cope with wind. For irrigation, groundwater from Milan is pumped into containers so they don't have to use drinking water. 3 membranes protect the building from water damage and stop roots getting through.
We have mainly deciduous here because of the risk of snow also.
You've got to think of everything: snow, heat, wind.
Sure.
So even 27 floors up, it's a case of right plant, right place.
This is a parrotia. A parrotia is one of the most interesting trees here at the Bosco Verticale because it's extremely efficient in capture pollution because of the leaves. There are roughy and there are hair on the lower side. And is also interesting because it's a huge amount of leaves, a high canopy.
That tree canopy also offers shade and reduces the temperature of the building, which can only be a positive factor in the fight against climate change. I would love to live in a vertical forest like this. These living towers have to be the way forward for future city living.
I thought that was completely fascinating. And I've seen living walls 10 years ago in Paris, and now to see trees, forests rising up these blocks really is awe-inspiring. And later in the program, Arit is going to go back and see what it's like to live in one of those flats. Now, my imperial fritillaries are not quite so dramatic and are very modest in comparison, but they're still extraordinary plants. And we have this variety called rubra here in the jewel garden, and then the yellow ones in the spring garden. And both of them share this dark, almost black chocolatey stem, and then the pineapple top. And one of the many things I love about these amazing plants is that they are pollinated by birds. If you see little blue tits up in amongst the flowers, they're really important because they are pollinating them. Now, these will last for 2 weeks if we're lucky, and then that's it. I suspect this spring everything will pass over rather quicker than normal. So this is a plant to relish for the moment while it lasts. A small job that it's worthwhile doing at this time of year is just to make sure that any climbing plants, like this climbing rose, are properly tied in. As things are starting to grow, they will start to develop their flower buds, and if you have a storm or a wind and they break, that is infuriating. Just fix them either to wires or trellis if you've got it. Use soft twine, and it's not too late to put up support, but if you do so, a really good tip is to make sure that it's well away from the wall or the fence, so you can easily get your hand in behind it. And that does two things. One, it lets a bit of ventilation up behind it and stops fungal problems, and also makes it much easier when you're tying them in like that. There we go. It's a small job, but it's good to get these things done before the garden really takes off. Now, we asked you to contact us to see if we could help you with any particular problems that you had in the garden. And we've had a letter from Lynn Smith saying that she had a border that was overgrown with shrubs and she didn't know how to tackle it. So Nick went to her home on the Welsh borders in Shropshire to lend her a hand.
It's a common problem. Trees and shrubs, which were once clipped and well maintained in our borders, can easily run out of control. But with the right know-how and a confident approach to pruning, it's possible to tackle these problem plants and bring your borders back under control. Lynn moved here in 2015 with her husband. They spent 2 years renovating the house, which meant the garden grew unchecked.
This is one of my major problems. It's a rose that's got out of control.
Okay.
The previous owner told me that it was an American pillar.
American pillar is a rambling rose. The rambling rose always flowers on the wood that it's produced in the previous year.
Okay.
So that really determines how you prune it.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to take away those fresh green stems that appeared last year that will produce this year's flower. This is completely out of control, so rather than a standard annual prune, we need to do a big rejuvenative prune. So we're going to be taking a lot of material away from it. Got this brilliant plant support up here in the name of this birch.
Okay.
So we can get rid of this bulky growth and then try and steer the new growth up into the tree. In a year or so's time, you will have a lovely display of those sort of bright pink, about 50p size flowers, and just add another layer of interest, so it's really worth doing. There's nothing worth keeping on that, so I can get rid of that. Any pruning job that you're doing, always take out the dead, diseased and damaged wood. An easy tip, Lynn, if you're ever unsure if a piece of timber you're cutting is dead or alive, is just to use your secateurs to scrape away a little bit of the bark on the surface.
Okay.
Now, if it's pale or dark like that underneath, then it's likely dead. If it's green and wet, then it's likely to be alive. So that's definitely gone. That can come out, and you can set to on these other darker stems now as well.
Okay, thanks.
When you're doing this sort of bulk pruning, the material itself can take up a huge volume. So if you chop it down as you go, it will make it smaller for the compost heap, but it will also rot it down more quickly, being in smaller pieces.
Goodness. Wow.
Now, having gotten rid of all that old bulky wood, we've now got these decent stems. You can then tuck behind the viburnum and it'll be ready to head up the birch tree for you. And you'll have a lovely display of pink flowers all the way through summer. What more could you want?
No, that's great.
Well, then that's the rose all sorted.
Lovely, thank you.
I understand you've got a few concerns about this Elaeagnus.
The major problem that I've got is that it's gone green on the edges, and I wasn't quite sure what I should do about that.
OK. I mean, this is something that fairly regularly happens with variegated plants. Variegation in plants happens for a number of different reasons. Sometimes it can be a virus, which is most likely the reason for the streaking in here. I know that sounds a bit scary,
Yeah.
but actually it's something that's been intentionally introduced. It's been selected because people like this particular look.
Right.
So it's not a bad thing. What's happening here is that the plant is basically fighting back against the virus. The plant's going back to its original green mode, and that's what's known as reversion. It's really simple to address. All you really need to do is to identify the piece of green leaf and then just trace it back till you start to see variegated leaves, and make a cut just above the good variegated bit. So got rid of the straight green. There's the variegation. That should grow away nicely. Now I can see there's a few more bits and pieces that need taking up here. So must be your go.
Okay.
Thing to check with your secateurs, there's two ways of cutting. And what you ideally want to do is cut with the blade against the stem, and that will give you the smartest, sharpest finished cut. And it just leaves a little bit of material around there so it can callus over and the plant can heal itself.
Okay.
Brilliant. Well, I reckon that's the worst of it. So I think that's your reversion sorted.
Wow, brilliant. Okay, Nick, would you have a look at this lovely tree for me? I really love it, and I just want to look after it in the best way I can.
What you've got is a sambucus, so an elder, but it's one of the ornamental forms.
Okay.
Different ways that you can manage it to get different effects. So if we left it for this year, it's already producing flower buds on the tips here.
Yeah.
So it'd flower quite prolifically and have a relatively small leaf. However, we can do a really severe hack, take it down to about a foot off the ground, and you'll find it will come up, it will regenerate beautifully this year, and you'll have much larger, more exotic looking leaves. So it depends on the kind of look you're looking to achieve. What do you think?
I like the sound of the latter, the big leaf and the exotic look.
Okay, so you're up for a radical hack?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. I'm just looking at the base of this stem, and you can see there's almost a sort of a swollen ring around here. And this is where there are absolute guarantee of buds, but also tucked away under the bark here are loads and loads of extra little buds. So doing a cut now will trigger those into growth. And by the end of this year, you'll have 2-metre stems coming back up.
Okay.
All right?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
I believe you.
So just going in from the back here, it's a nice soft wood, so it's easy to go through. And there we go.
Okay.
Nice, neat cut.
Yes.
So, Lynn, I think it's your turn. Down to the same level, so it's just above a node. And I reckon, Lynn, we're going to need secateurs now for the last few cuts.
Okay.
Lovely, just a couple more to do.
Oh my goodness.
You're going to put me out of a job, Lynn.
Oh yeah.
Lovely job. So that's the sambucus sorted. Now, there's a few other things in this area. We've got this ivy, which is Heterocultica, which is running absolutely everywhere. It's just a case of pulling it by hand where it's rooted into the ground, work your way back, and then it will reveal and give more of a chance to this thing to grow. It's called Sorbaria. White flowers in spring, it's great. And I've just noticed down here, actually, this vinca is looking a bit sad. Now, you could leave it for a few weeks to finish flowering, or you could shear it off completely now.
Okay.
Chop it back down to the ground, and you get a nice, fresh spurt of growth.
This year?
Yes, indeed.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, more gardening?
Yes, absolutely. Guess what I'm doing this weekend?
The great thing, if you've got overgrown shrubs and you don't really know what to do, is don't be frightened of them. Far better to cut too hard than not cut at all. The worst thing that can happen in almost all cases is that you'll miss out on a flowering season. But plants are much tougher than you think, but don't be timid. They're tougher and they can be more rampant than you think too. I've got a confession to make. Last year, I planted mint out into my herb garden. Now, I say a confession, it was a kind of experiment, because I planted them into pockets surrounded by cobbles and stone, And immediately I did it. People on the internet and people were writing me letters saying, you regret it, they will spread, and they did spread. The runners went sideways through the cobbles, under the stone, popped up in the path. So this winter, I dug up all the mint, put it into pots, and now I'm going to pot it into containers. And I would say that if you're growing mint, and you should, it's a fabulous herb to grow, do so in a container unless you are completely prepared for it to take over an entire area. Now, I've got an old basin here. You can see it's got holes in the bottom that I've drilled, and that will serve really well for growing mint. Now, I've got some crocks here, and pebbles would do, or small stones, just to make sure those holes don't get clogged. I've also mixed up a potting mix with plenty of grit in it. They don't like poor soil so much as decent drainage. Right, this is peppermint. Peppermint is ideal for mint tea. So I'm going to plant this in here. Now, this is a plastic pot. I'm going to keep using this, keep recycling it. The best thing you can do to reduce plastic is to use the plastic you've got. Recycle it at home. Now, here we go. The smell of that as I do is fantastic. That rich, minty aroma. Mint needs to be grown in semi-shade and keep it well watered. Now, obviously, when you grow it in a container, you'll find that the mint will get less productive. So what I do in a container is take all the plants out, divide them, and then put fresh compost in about every 3 years. Peppermint, spearmint, and apple mint are really useful, but don't grow them in the same container because the tastes cross over and blur each other. That will very quickly grow to fill up the entire pot, but it won't escape. Still to come, Arit meets the people who live and work at the Bosco Verticale.
Can't imagine what it must be like to prune at height, looking over Milan.
But first, Frances gets to work on her allotment.
Springtime. It's a busy time for allotments far and wide, and with the cold snap hopefully over, here in Bristol, there are little hints of spring around every corner. Luke Murray is an allotment newbie like me, and this year he's kindly agreed to share his plot with me. In return, I'm helping him get to grips with his extreme sight. Despite the weather conditions, his enthusiasm is unstoppable. Luke.
Hey, how you doing?
Well, thanks. Every time I turn around, there's more stuff built. You've been so busy.
Yeah, thanks. I've been trying to make the most of like the nice days of sunshine when we've had them, and when we've not. But yeah, you can see we've got like a bit of raised beds in. We've kind of got a few of the compost bays. Everything here is made out of just kind of pallet wood, things that I've kind of been able to recycle, repurpose, reuse.
Is that horse manure?
Yeah, it is. I'm really fortunate. There's a really good friend of mine, Nick, and she's got horses, and she's given me free rein on her huge mound of horse poo, which is great.
Great, that's a nice job.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, and then starting to fill these up and bring, bring a bit of nutrients to the soil.
But these will be my beds, is that right?
Yep. So hopefully we're going to build another 3 the other side, so we'll have like a nice mirror view of it. And yeah, 4 out of the 6 of those will. I'm more than happy for you to kind of go mad on. Plant whatever you like.
That sounds good to me. Well, look, I will get on and do this one because I can see you've steamed right ahead. I need to catch up.
No worries, we've got plenty of shovels to go around. Okay, we'll sort you out.
Cool. All right, let's do it. This is the most intense clay I've ever had to work with. To improve the heavy soil, in these raised beds we're adding cardboard, which will act as a natural weed suppressant. This will also add carbon and encourage bacteria to rejuvenate the soil. When you're doing an allotment, sometimes it's a really huge amount of work. But if you want to save yourself that work, you can use a no-dig policy, which is basically a way of letting nature do all the hard work for you. This is manure, but it's really, really good and well-rotted manure. It's already full of worms, which is lovely to see. This doesn't smell at all. It's essentially really high nutrient
really good for the soil. So the first layer I'm putting down is a layer of manure. And then I'll put a layer of soil, a layer of compost, and the idea is that over time, the microbes and the roots within the soil will mix that up for you. That way you keep the integrity of your soil structure. I've got a little notebook for my allotment, and it's something I always like to do if I'm doing a new project, is to kind of keep a record of what I've done. So if I'm writing down the varieties of crops I've grown, I can see later on in the year where they are, what they are, and then next year I'll know which ones were good and which ones weren't so good. Unfortunately, the weather hasn't been so good this spring, so everything's quite behind, but what I can still plant is some broad beans. And when you're planting broad beans, make sure you have them upright rather than laying flat. If they're flat, then the water sits on them and they can rot off. And I'm going to put them about 5 centimetres down to the soil and about 20 centimetres apart. They're quite bushy, they're not like a traditional kind of climbing bean, so they'll support each other if they're at that width. You don't want them too close together, but you also don't want them too far apart, so they'll flop over in the wind. Here on the allotment, there are so many people I'm really keen to meet, and hopefully I can learn a thing or two along the way. Hi, Gilbert.
Hi, dear.
How are you doing?
Not too bad, dear.
Gilbert Winter is from a long line of Caribbean plot holders. From a young age, he's learnt everything about growing your own, and is at his happiest when he's on his allotment.
So what does it mean to you to have this space to come to?
There's a little bit of nature around here. Apart from the cars and all them things, you can just dream away when you sit down.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm telling you, the food that you buy in the green groceries in them place, you know, it's different.
Yeah.
And that even make me want to grow more.
Yes.
It's love you're putting in, you know. And when people are eating your food and it's that love from you, you know, the whole combination of come into one.
What things do you grow here every year? Do you have sort of staple crops?
Yeah, my greens, which is callaloo.
Okay, you managed to grow that here?
Yes, it's a Caribbean thing, but it works.
Really? And what does it taste like? I've never tried it.
Well, it's kind of like spinach, but with a unique flavour.
Callaloo originated in West Africa, but is very popular in Caribbean communities. You don't see it growing here in the UK very often, that's for sure.
These seeds are for you to try and see what result you can get.
That's amazing. Thank you so much.
That's my gift for you, right? But you kind of got to wait until the weather warms.
So how do you know when it's warm enough to do?
When you're weeding, you got your hands in the ground, and you could feel that warmth, then you know, yes.
And if I get stuck, you'll be here, I can come and ask for advice?
Yeah, well, I hope you do come and check me so I can see the progress.
Absolutely. It's lovely meeting people like Gilbert and becoming a part of this allotment community, and when you get some seeds out of it, that's an added bonus. It'd be fun to experiment, but I really hope they grow.
But I know the tomatoes, chard and kale sprout I sowed last month should be coming along nicely. I'm just going to check how they're doing.
My seeds are not doing quite as well as I would have hoped. We have some chard successes, a couple of the kale sprouts have germinated, but no tomatoes at all, which is a bit of a shame, but actually they were quite dry. So what I've done is I've put them in this tray of water, which will keep them really, really moist and give the tomatoes a chance to germinate. But today I'm going to sow some more seeds, which are a little bit later in the season. We're a bit warmer now. Hopefully there won't be any more frost. I'm going to use plastic pots just to see if that makes a difference. What I've done is I've bought some really nice quality ones so that when they're done with for this year, I can reuse them year after year. And into that, I am growing some sweet corn. This is Swift, which is a really common and reliable variety. It grows well and it has a good flavour, which is what you want from your edibles. And I'm just going to put 2 in each pot. And generally, you're only going to want 1. So whichever comes up weaker will be given to someone else on the allotment if they haven't got sweet corn and would like some. And because they're a tender crop, they can't go outside yet, so I'm going to put them out in May time, when hopefully we'll have a bit of sunshine. It's been a really productive day. I feel like finally there are seeds in the ground, there are seeds in the pots, it's all beginning to come together. So once the season really changes, which you can feel, this will really kick off and it will look so transformed, as if it's not transformed enough already. I'm really looking forward to seeing it all next time.
Come on. That clay is spectacularly heavy. It'd be very interesting to see how those raised beds work out. And I hadn't come across callaloo, like Francis, until about 10, 12 years ago when I saw it growing on an allotment in Nottingham. And since then I can vouch that it is delicious and definitely worth growing. Come on, Dixie, come on. I came in here to get my special rake, which has got a double row of tines, but there's a blackbird who's built her nest on it and is sitting on the eggs now. So I'll use my old one. Francis was saying how that getting broad beans in the ground is much later than normal, but the ground is warming up. The sun is coming out. In fact, it's come out dramatically in the last half hour or so here at Longmeadow, and that means the soil will very quickly warm up and be good for sowing all kinds of things. And I'm going to put some peas in. You want to put them on ground that is freshly manured. They're nitrogen fixing, but they like plenty of nitrogen and goodness in the soil. They're the first part of the crop rotation. You go legumes, followed by brassica, followed by roots, and then you fit other things around them. But you rake a reasonably fine tilth, and then I got this over the winter. It's a hoe perfect for drawing a wide, flat drill, which is the way that I like to sow peas. So just pull the hoe gently through like that. And what you're left with is a very shallow trench. Now, I've got two varieties, but I'm going to start with Hurst Greenshaft. This is a good doer. It's a standard pea, it's quite old-fashioned, it's tall, and gives a good crop. Now, what I like to do is to place them in a double row along the drill. So, 1, 2. There's been hot debate on the matter of spacing peas, as you can imagine. Should you sow them in single rows, double rows, triple rows even? I think the consensus is double rows works best. And then each pea about 3 to 6 inches apart. I've got another variety, and these are peas that I gathered from last year called Carabi de Mouzin. And they have purple flowers, and you can eat them pod and all, and they're very tasty. I try and grow these every year. And I'm just growing a couple of short rows of each variety now, and I'll do another sowing in about 3 weeks' time to stagger the season. Last week I said, don't stand on a raised bed, whatever you do. Well, this is not a raised bed. I've deliberately got these two beds so that you can walk over them, which makes harvesting of things like peas and beans and squashes a lot easier. Now, there's plenty of moisture in the ground. We've had enough rain, after all. If it's very dry, they'll need watering, but the critical time to water peas is when they flower. When they come into flower, give them a really good soak. Peas are twiners, and they need something for their tendrils to cling to. So pea sticks are what you traditionally use, which are the bushy parts from hazel coppicing. But you could use netting if you want. Now, you can put that in now before they grow. I tend to wait until I see the shoots just appear from the ground, and then I stake them. So I'll be doing that in a few weeks' time. Now, it's time to go back to Milan and rejoin Arit. We saw the amazing work that's being done there with the Bosco Verticali, and now she's looking at actually how they're maintained.
The Bosco Verticale is the vertical forest that towers over Milan. It's home to 117 species of plants and trees which are woven into the building to provide benefits for humans and wildlife. I'm on the 14th floor of one of the towers, which is an incredible experience because I'm surrounded by all of these trees and plants and almost in a forest, yet at the same time I can hear all the sounds of the city. It's quite an unusual experience, I have to say. But what does really fascinate me is how is this all maintained? Who keeps this looking fantastic? And also, what must it be like to live here? One answer is waiting for me outside. I don't know if you can make out, but up there's one of the flying gardeners who look after the towers. I can't imagine what it must be like to prune at height, looking over Milan. What an amazing job. 5 tree surgeons, aptly named flying gardeners, soar high above the city of Milan to maintain the trees on these towers. One thing's for sure, they definitely have a head for heights. I'm meeting Giovanni and Rene to find out what it's like to carry out extreme gardening suspended from ropes 110 metres up in the sky.
Honestly, the first feeling I had when the first time they asked me to think about working on this building was perplexity. Yes, and afterward, this feeling has been substituted by fascination. We love working here.
How do these trees get secured?
Here, the trees have to face a strong wind. So, just in case that there is a broken branches or part of the trunk is secured.
In the case of this Corylus coluna, how would you prune it?
We have to thin a bit the crown without altering the shape and its natural beauty.
Giovanni, you must see so much different wildlife.
During the work, we take a rest and we sit down here in the balcony or also on the trees. And we can hear the sound of the birds and the sound of the wind that going through the canopy. And it's very particular things because we are in the center of the Milan, in the center of the town.
Yeah, to have nature so close to the building.
It's a perfect place to nest. I mean, if I would be a bird, I would choose the streets.
Yeah.
But the condition for trees here are, we could say, perfect.
It sounds like the trees have got the perfect conditions, and it sounds like you've got the perfect job. The average tenant has 2 trees, 8 shrubs, and over 40 plants. So what's it actually like to live in this forest? Simona Pizzi is one of the residents here.
I was one of the first people, or maybe even the first one, who came to live here at Bosco Verticale. When it's really hot, for instance, last summer was boiling, the plants give you a sense of protection and shade from the sun.
Do you have a favourite season, Simona?
From mid-May to mid-June is the most beautiful time, but also in autumn, because you can see the colors changing. Plants start showing different colors. It's beautiful, because they change from red to yellow to orange. It's definitely a wonderful feeling. Because looking out the window in the morning and seeing first thing from your bed all these plants and flowers, it almost makes you feel like you are not living in a big city like Milan.
The Bosco Verticale started as an experiment, but it seems to have worked, with new towers planned worldwide. So does architect Stefano Boeri think this is the way forward?
Urban forestry is not simply vertical forest. It's roof garden, it's the idea of orbital forest around our cities. So it's all this together. The issue of urban forestry will be crucial in the next years if you really want to reverse climate change.
goes to show that this is going to be something that can be created for our futures, and that we can use our spaces in such a way that is the perfect combination for both people, plants and places.
That is not just inspiring. I think it's really important because it's been reckoned that there will be 1.5 billion more people on this planet by 2030. And they'll all need somewhere to live. And to make cities viable, good to live in, and environmentally sound, you need that kind of project. Now, just a little tip. If you've got daffodils that are starting to go over, and you want them to go on flowering in the same place next year, take the seed heads off. Just pinch them off with your fingers. And that means that energy that would otherwise have gone into producing seed will go back into the bulb, and next year's flowers will be bigger and healthier as a result. This is something to do for daffodils growing in borders or in containers, but not if they're growing in long grass. In that case, leave the seed heads on, and then they will seed themselves and gradually spread far and wide. That's just a little tip, but here are some jobs you can do this weekend. It's been a late spring generally, but it's not too late to sow parsnips, but this is something to get on with, as they are slow to germinate. Draw a drill in well-prepared soil and spread the flat seeds evenly along it, about 1 inch or so apart. Because they're slow to develop, you can sow radish in the same drill. These will grow very quickly and will be harvested and eaten before they're competing with the parsnips for space and nutrients. It's time to start supporting herbaceous perennials. The secret is to do this before they need it. It doesn't matter what you use, whether it's cane and string, brushwood, or as I am, homemade metal supports. Try and do it so that it looks as natural as possible, providing support, but not constraint. The primrose season is coming to an end, but now is the best time to divide them to make new plants. It doesn't matter if you're growing them in a container or the ground, the technique is the same. Lift them, tease them apart with your hands, and replant the different sections, water them in well, and they will grow into healthy plants next spring. Last week, when we were here in the writing garden, only about 1/3 of the thalia daffodils were open, which was disappointing. But with a little bit of sunshine, they have all opened out. They're at their very best, and not only are they looking good, they're smelling fabulous too. And amongst them, the little tulip, Lady Jane, has just started to flower. This is a tulip that is flush pink on the outside, and then opens out pure white and closes up at night, and will keep flowering for a couple of weeks. Now, that's it for this week. Don't forget, next week is the RHS's National Gardening Week. There are lots of events, there are gardens you can go and see, and you can get all the details of those on our website. But the whole point is to inspire you to get out into your garden. I'm afraid we won't be back in this garden next week. We're off air. But back here in a fortnight's time, when we shall also be visiting the Spring Show at Morven. So I'll see you then. Bye-bye.